joining us via YouTube, via Twitter, and also Instagram. Welcome to everybody who have decided to join us. Today, we are going to, look at, take stock at the response of South Africa as a country to the pandemic, where we had our first case on the 5th of March last year. Now, who better to help us, to take stock than Professor Salim, Safruddin, Abdool, Karim, commonly referred to as Prof Slim. Prof Slim is a South African clinical infectious diseases epidemiologist who's widely recognized for scientific contributions to HIV prevention and treatment. He is the director for the Center for the AIDS Program of Research in South Africa, CAPRISA, and that's based in Durban. He's also the CAPRISA Professor of Global Health at Columbia University in New York. He's also an adjunct professor of immunology and infectious diseases at Harvard University. He's also an adjunct professor of medicine at Cornell University, also in the US. He is a pro-vice chancellor research at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. But the other reason why he is here, he is the co-chair of the South African Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19. And he's also a member of the Africa Task Force on Coronavirus interventions. He's also a member of the Lancet Commission on COVID-19. Now, if I had to read more about the Prof, I'm sure it will take us a long time, but this is his brief bio, so that you know why we have somebody of the level of Prof as our special guest today. Prof, welcome to the Dr. Fundi channel.
Great pleasure to be with you here today.
Thank you, Prof. Belated congratulations on being, jointly recognized with Dr. Anthony Fauci, from the US, as a recipient of the John Maddox Prize 2020, the 9th version, for the good work that you've been doing in the space of science and epidemiology.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
All right, Prof. Now, Prof, we've got a lot of people who are our viewers here. Most of them are medical people, but there's also a lot of people who are non-medical. So just to kickstart our discussion, you are a world-class epidemiologist. Now, can you just briefly tell us what is an epidemiologist?
Sure. So, I studied medicine like you, and I completed my training here at what was then called University of Natal Black Section. Yeah. Today it's called the Nelson R. Mandela School of Medicine. And then I went on to studying virology. I did medical virology, but then decided to go to the US and study epidemiology. And epidemiology is the study of how diseases spread. So it's about quantifying the extent of a disease, extent of risk factor for a disease, and then to understand the relationships. What causes disease? What makes them spread? What facilitates their spread? And so that's what I've spent my life studying.
All right. So you are now an epidemiologist, although you started as a virologist, right? Now, just on that point of being an epidemiologist, in the last few years, Prof, a number of epidemiologists across the world have been warning their countries and the world, to get ready or to be prepared for a future pandemic that would be caused by a respiratory, transmitted type of illness. The US even set up a unit after the, the SARS, epidemic, and also the H1N1, which was subsequently, I would say, dismantled by the previous president. Now, I want to know from you as an epidemiologist, were you also, in the same mind that, we would be caught napping as the world or as the globe, should there be an epidemic, that is respiratory transmitted?
You're absolutely right. So I did an investigation of an epidemic of measles in northern KwaZulu-Natal back in the 1980s. So that's how far back it goes. And at that time, the investigation done by Professor Kuvadia and myself, we were called to Parliament by the then Minister of Health under apartheid, called Rina Venter. And she called us, we went to see her, and she really wanted to know what should she do to stop this epidemic. And since then, of course, I've been dealing with many epidemics. The most notable of which was, dealing with the elimination of polio. I chaired the country's polio expert committee. But for me, the thing that I remember most was when I chaired the National Advisory Group on Immunization. Professor Barry Shub and I and several others were part of putting together our country's plans to deal with a flu epidemic. Basically, on the basis that there is going to be a flu pandemic and South Africa would be affected. And so our plans were put back in the 1990s, early 1990s, about stockpiling amantadine, looking at strain variations, ensuring access to vaccines, preparing hospitals for the admission of elderly people. We put all those plans together a long time ago, more than 25 years ago. However, what has happened in the meantime is that several outbreaks of influenza started, but they never became pandemics. And so what happened, it became a case of crying wolf. People just got disillusioned that, we've been waiting. There've been all these threats. There's been a threat, it's going to come, it's coming. H5N, avian flu, it's going to be this, it's going to be SARS. Nothing came. And so countries became disillusioned and they were questioning the cost of doing all of this. And so they let their guard down. And just when they let the guard down, you have an outbreak of a respiratory disease in the form of coronavirus. Now, it should be said that we were forewarned. We were forewarned because back in 2002, we had an outbreak of SARS. And in 2012, we had an outbreak of MERS. And now we have an outbreak of SARS-CoV-2. All three were bat coronaviruses. So we knew it was coming. It was a matter of time.
What is it about these coronaviruses that almost every 10 years, they are causing havoc? You've just mentioned SARS, 2002, 2003, about 850 people died, then MERS, 2012, I think 750 people or so died. And now we've got the current pandemic of SARS-CoV-2. What is this about these coronaviruses that seems to be causing us problems?
So it's very unusual because the coronavirus is a single-stranded RNA virus. And as a single-stranded RNA virus, is actually a very long RNA. It's 30,000 bases. Again, that's a bit unusual. But one of the characteristics of this coronavirus is that it does not have the ability to attach to human cells. Put very simply, you can walk around with bats and, with all of their coronaviruses, and you wouldn't be concerned at all because bat coronaviruses cannot infect humans. However, when a bat coronavirus goes through an intermediate host, an intermediate host means it went into some other animal. In the case of the original SARS, it's thought to be through civets. Civets look like cats. In the case of MERS, through camels. And in the case of SARS-CoV-2, it hasn't been established yet, but it's thought to be pangolins. So when it goes through an intermediate host, the RNA of the virus acquires an additional piece that enables the virus to attach to human cells and a specific receptor called the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor. So it's the acquisition of the ACE2 receptor binding protein that enables suddenly a harmless virus that we don't care about to become a deadly virus. And the full reason for why this virus is so deadly, we don't fully understand, because it's not the virus that kills people. It's often the immune response. What happens is that the body overreacts to the virus. And so most of the deaths from SARS-CoV-2 are actually from the body's own immune response that leads to, because the virus is present in the little alveolar sacs in the lungs, that the body responds. And so you get pus filling up these little alveoli. And when that happens, you can't exchange oxygen. And so that's what the problem is. Now, we don't fully understand why do people overreact, but it seems like diabetics, hypertensives, people with cancer, and people who are old all overreact, and we don't understand why yet.
Yes. Now, so when you then heard, Prof, that there is this epidemic that has just started in China, and this is like end 2019, beginning of January last year. So as an epidemiologist, obviously those news must have got to you very quickly, you know, and all of us were hoping that it won't come this way. But within a month, it had spread beyond China. It had started to also, you know, spread in Asia and into Europe. So what was going through your mind at that time? Now, obviously thinking about South Africa, thinking about Africa.
So I first learned about this virus and the pneumonia it was causing. Actually, we didn't know it was a virus at the time, but it was causing a pneumonia from something called ProMed. So I subscribe to something called ProMed Alert. So that alert basically tells me if there's any crisis in health anywhere around the world. So I happened to be, it was December 30th, 2019. I happened to be on holiday with my family in the Drakensberg, and I was on a hike with my family, and my iWatch, you know, just beeped. And of course, while I'm walking, I said, okay, let me just see what's this beep? And it's a ProMed alert. And it basically says that there's an undiagnosed pneumonia in a group of patients in a Chinese city called Wuhan. I looked at it and I said, it might be SARS, but nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
And I just carried on my walk. I had no idea what the future impact of that alert was going to be. Yeah. And it wasn't until about January 11th, I was back in my office at the medical school here in Durban, that my colleague came up and said, have you seen this on Twitter? I said, what? He says, the virus's RNA sequence is on Twitter. I said, what do you mean it's on Twitter? Twitter is for, adolescents communicating with each other. We are scientists. Who puts an RNA sequence on Twitter? He says, that's how it's happening now. You guys, you're not keeping in touch. That's how we know about the virus. So we looked at it and we realized that we were dealing with something scary. Yeah. And I think when I realized, the message came home to me when my colleagues at China CDC, led by Dr. George Gao, when they announced that they found human-to-human transmission, because that, I just went cold. I knew we were now in for trouble. This was going to be a problem. And when that happened, I think I wasn't the only one who saw it as a real problem looming. People all over the world started reacting badly. And I think most of that occurred when people saw people dying in Italy. Italy was one of the first countries affected. People were dying. The hospitals were overwhelmed. And what happened? Everybody tried to buy their toilet rolls quickly. That was, I'm sitting in my head, I was like, what's going on here? People buying toilet rolls.
Yeah.
But that's what happened. People were panicking and they were reacting irrationally.
Yes, that's what they now refer to as health anxiety. So there was health anxiety, worrying about what was coming. All right, so Prof, at what point then did you and your colleagues within South Africa decide that, we now need to get our country ready? Obviously there's the Minister of Health, but, you're one of the prominent epidemiologists in the country.
So in the middle of February, even before we knew, what was going to happen, I had a meeting with my team, and we decided to partition the lab. We put a boundary across half the lab, and we converted the one side of our lab that does all the PCR testing.
Yes.
We normally do HIV testing there, but we took the HIV testing out of there, and we converted that into COVID testing. Yeah. At that time, the virus had just acquired its name, SARS-CoV-2.
Yes.
We, Professor D'Oliveira and myself, we contacted colleagues in Beijing at the Beijing Genome Institute, yeah. And we asked them if they can send us reagents. We needed primers for the PCR. And so by the middle of February, we had our lab up and running. We were doing COVID testing. There were no cases. We were doing all this testing.
Information had been shared with you, by your colleagues, in China, though. Yeah.
So we started testing patients who had fever and cough, and we didn't find any cases. And then, of course, on the 5th of March, it all changed, because now we had our first case. It was real, and it was
to come from KZN.
and somebody from Italy, of all things. Yeah. So, but I think it's a reflection of the importance of showing leadership and being proactive and not waiting for the world to take you on, but you take the world on. You define what is going to happen. You define how we're going to deal with this problem, because you are proactive. And so that's what we did.
Yeah. And at what point did you also, rally around the guys within South Africa now?
Right. So what happened was that about a week or two later, I think it was about 2 weeks later, I got a call. My secretary got a call from the minister's office. The minister is having a meeting. He'd like me to attend. So I said, sure, I'm happy to attend. So I attended that meeting. It was on the 23rd of March last year. At that meeting, there were about 50 to 60 scientists from throughout South Africa. Most of them were HIV and TB scientists, for the obvious reason. We've got a lot of HIV.
So that's the pandemic that we've been dealing with, since the 90s. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we were all there, and on this call, the minister went through, that they've been doing all these preparations, and they, are now, looking at how to respond to this epidemic in South Africa. And the Director General then announced that they're creating these 3 streams of work on diagnostics, on treatment, and on prevention.
Yeah.
And then he announces, and Professor Abdool Karim will be the overarching chair.
Yeah.
So I looked at him, but on the screen, and of course he can't see me, but I was going to do it. He didn't need to ask me, but I considered it my duty. And so I became the chair of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on the 23rd of March last year. And in doing so, the key things we had to do was the minister needed advice. There were a whole lot of questions that he had. and he just bombarded us. We were getting, questioned almost every day. Yeah. And we as a committee would sit together and we would try and figure it out. And then very quickly, we decided we needed more people. And so we created technical working groups. We brought a lot of people from outside to come and give more information. And that's how we guided our country, through what was, very uncertain times, very uncertain.
So in the initial decision to put the country on level 5 lockdown on the 26th of March last year, how much input from you guys as experts, in that decision by, the country to say, well, we need to actually limit movement of people because this thing doesn't have legs. So, if we limit the movement of people, maybe we will slow it down whilst getting the health system to be a little bit better, or ready for the flood that was, going to be coming.
Yeah, so the Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19 didn't have any input into that because we were created on the day on which the president announced it. So we were already, by the time we were created, there was already a state of disaster. The state of disaster had already been created. And on the 23rd, the very day on which we were created, the president announced the lockdown. So it was not a decision that was determined by the Ministerial Advisory Committee. But once it had been determined, it then became our responsibility to figure out what do we need to do with this. And I remember doing a literature search. I said, okay, what do we know about lockdowns? Let me go and find what is written about lockdowns. Yeah. And so I did a search. And I remember it was a search around the last week of March. Yeah. And only 3 articles came up. One in a journal called the International Journal of Epidemiology, where there was a lockdown in Mexico for swine flu. They had a swine flu epidemic and they locked down one part of Mexico. The second was an article in a newspaper, The Guardian, and it was about a lockdown in Sierra Leone for Ebola. Yeah. And then the third was a little handbook from China about how they did the lockdown in Wuhan. That's it. That's it. There's no great science that was done on lockdowns. Yeah. In fact, lockdowns are not even a terminology that's used in epidemiology. In all my years of training in epidemiology and teaching epidemiology, we've never used that word. It is a military word. It's a military concept. It's not a health concept. But because the Chinese used it, and because when the Chinese used it, they stopped the epidemic. Yeah. So everybody learned, okay, we better follow this route. And they all learned that if you institute lockdowns, you impact transmission. Yeah.
So now, Prof, we've just finished a year, since that first case. Now, looking back at the last 12 months or so, of this pandemic, if you can be a little bit critical of our response as a country, what would you say are the highlights, that is the positive things that we did, and also maybe areas where you feel the country, could have done better, I know sometimes it's not easy to do that when you are part of the people who are, advising, but I'm just asking you to just be a bit critical.
Sure. I'll be very happy to do that. So let me pick on 3 things that I felt we did well and 3 things that we didn't do well. So the first thing I felt that we did really well was that we took this disease seriously. And I don't know how important that is when you look at the US and how they didn't take the disease seriously. President was saying, it's going to disappear when it gets warm, and, the moment you don't take a disease seriously, you're heading for trouble. And so we are very fortunate. And having, dealt with HIV, this was amazing to hear that the government wanted to deal with this problem and that they were willing to make really difficult decisions. You have to be very brave to make a decision on creating a state of disaster, even before you have your first death. Because, you know, you don't get re-elected because you make people stay at home. It's against everything you'd want to do, right? The reaction would be try and create as much, you know, normality as possible. Well, our government said, no, save lives. Do what it takes to save lives. If you're uncertain, rather be conservative, save lives. And so I found that, and that the government created the Scientific Advisory Committee. The government asked us for scientific advice. We were not just giving it, they were proactive. So I felt that that was a very positive thing. The second, for me, was that when, you know, I shared with the minister what, you know, my understanding of this epidemic was, at a time when there was very high uncertainty, you know, he asked me to share that with the president. I did a presentation to the president, and the president said, you've got to present this to the public. You've got to take the public into confidence. So I said, no problem. I've got my slides. I'll work on it, and I'll, you know, be ready tomorrow. He said, no, you're going to do it today. So that evening, the 13th of April, the president arranged, you know, said we should do this. So the minister arranged it. And I did a presentation on television. I've never done that before. I mean, you know me, I do a talk at a conference. And so I'm doing this presentation, and I'm now into my 10th or 11th slide, and the minister leans over and he says, nobody can see your slides. I said, oh, goodness, television doesn't know that you have to focus on the slides. Don't look at me. There's no point in me, focus on the slides. So I had to start again. But there was a seismic shift in people's thinking as a result of that. Because people now began to say, oh, now we understand what this problem is. Right, because I went through it from start to finish. I went from the Wuhan seafood market all the way through what we know, what we don't know. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I said, you know, we don't have any mojo that's going to protect us. We're going to get this epidemic. And I said, here's our plan. We have an 8-stage plan for what we're going to do. So I felt that that was the start of what was to come, which was that we were going to have, you know, truthful, transparent information. And that has been a case throughout. I've done now, 6 or 7 of these public briefings. No other country with scientists go on TV and do presentations with slides. That's a uniquely South African thing. Then the third, for me, is I actually saw how South Africans can move mountains. When they are pushed, I mean, you tell me, if you asked me in February and said to me, can you take the Cape Town Convention Center and convert it into an 800-bed hospital? And I'd like you to make sure that there's oxygen at every bed. And I want you to make sure that you do all of this in 6 weeks. I would have laughed at you. I said, in 6 weeks, you can't even draw a plan for a hospital. I said, hospitals take years. Right? No. We want you to do this. And I was shocked. They did it. The Cape Town ICC had a fully functional hospital. You know what it takes to build a hospital? Because you got to feed patients, you got to care for them, you have laundry, you have medication. I mean, it's a big thing to do, and they did it. If you take, you know, when I was a little boy, when I saw the name DeFi, they were the ones that made fridges, stoves, and microwaves. DeFi is making ventilators. Right. I mean, you saw in the second wave how, you know, all these ventilators were being delivered to the hospitals with the CPAP being made by a local company, you know, among others, DeFi. So I see how South Africans, we can do amazing things when we put our mind to it. We spend too much time bickering, but we can really move mountains. The 3 negative things, which I've already spoken at length about, you know, for me, the first was I was very disappointed in the way in which military action occurred under the level 5 lockdown. And I I have been, quite taken aback by the actions around Collins Causa. I mean, for us to lose a life in that way was really unacceptable.
Yeah.
The second for me, was the PPE corruption. What kind of person uses this as an opportunity to steal? It just defeats me that you have such amazing volunteerism, people coming out to help others, and people want to steal. I just find that so difficult. And then for me, the third is the conspiracy theories. And in particular, how people are in the midst of a wave, when they see the cases going up and they feel anxious and they feel, they're helpless, they want a miracle cure. And in the first wave, I had to deal with hydroxychloroquine. Everybody, the first thing, all the pharmacies ran out of hydroxychloroquine. And there's no evidence for hydroxychloroquine. No, we want hydroxychloroquine. Then where's my artemisinin? The president of Madagascar. Is putting it in the bottles, and they got no COVID in Madagascar. I said, you're crazy. These are anti-parasitic medications. In the second wave, same thing. This time they chose another anti-parasitic, Ivamectin. Where is Ivamectin? We want this miracle cure. I said, I've been through this. There's no miracle cure.
Yeah. Now, but the last two issues that you've mentioned now, the chloroquine and also the Ivamectin. I think for me, the fact that even medical practitioners, qualified medical doctors, were some of the strongest advocates, of something that had not been proven, So for me, that was an issue. We are taught to follow science and wait for science, but then it was the first time I see medical doctors, aggressively challenging the government, challenging the regulator, saying approve this thing without any substance behind it.
And you're absolutely right, because we have spent many years to protect us from exactly these kinds of drugs that are being dumped or drugs that are charlatans. And we've always said, and every doctor knows this, we have a very clear scientific approach to any medication. A medication is licensed when there is a randomized controlled trial that shows evidence that it's efficacious. In the case of Ivamectin, the studies were awful. There was not a single study that I could say, okay, here's some evidence that this is compelling. It's flimsy evidence. But now the clinical trials are starting to come out. We saw the first just came out about a week or two ago in JAMA. That showed no benefit. Now we're waiting. There's actually 2 more big clinical trials. Let's wait for them. I keep an open mind. Let's wait. Let's see what they show. If there's evidence that it works, of course we must license it, but not license it first and then go and find the proof.
Yes. And, the advisory that you signed off, I think on the 7th of January on Ivamectin was exactly talking about the fact that the studies were not up to scratch, and you were advising, the minister that there shouldn't be any approval. But then, about a week or so later, SAPRA was under so much pressure, and then they had to sort of allow it for compassion reasons, something that I've never heard before. Your thoughts around that kind of decision?
Yeah, so, the regulator is separate from us. We're an external body. We just give advice. SAPRA is a government institution regulating medicines. Now, I know that we have a Section 21 access mechanism because I've used it myself. For a cancer patient. When you want a medication that's not licensed in our country, but where there's some evidence to show that it's safe, may be efficacious, you don't know that for sure yet, you can import a drug like that it's on a compassionate basis, and it's for an individual named patient. So you can't go and get 1 million tablets. That's not how Section 21 works. Section 21 works on a compassionate basis. So that is a legitimate mechanism. I don't have a problem with using that for COVID.
Yeah.
What's at issue is that if you use that mechanism, it takes time because you have to fill out all the forms, you have to pay the fee, and then they process it and they give you permission. Now, I understood SAPRA was having difficulty with that because there were just too many applications. Yeah. So they were willing to make some concessions on that issue. They made it very clear there's no evidence that Ivamectin works. Yeah. It's just, it's a compassionate basis. It's an unproven medication for compassionate purposes.
Yeah. Now, Prof, already at that point, I mean, let's say by 6 months into the pandemic, there was no treatment, and the only hope was vaccines. Now, my question then is around South Africa. You know, if I remember, around '94, we had the ability as a country to actually manufacture some of the vaccines. I think the polio vaccine, if I'm not mistaken. You know, but that ability last year wasn't there. You know, so my question, Prof, is as a country, why did we get to a point where we were not in a position to create our own vaccines? Is it an issue of funding? Is it an issue that we didn't have the researchers or scientists to be able to produce that? What was the problem? Because I'm asking this question already looking forward to saying this won't be the last pandemic that is caused by a virus. So the issue of vaccination, of research and development, into vaccine formation, maybe let me also throw in the African continent. And the reason for that is that we are also part of the response by the continent. Why is it that this continent, seems to be more of a consumer of stuff that is produced elsewhere, or collaborators on studies that are done by the rich countries?
Yeah. No, you ask a very good and important question. So about 30 years ago or so, South Africa was totally self-reliant on vaccines. And it was a deliberate policy of government under apartheid. The government was concerned that the international community may not allow it to buy vaccines as part of the international boycott. So the government created 3 facilities to manufacture these vaccines. The State Vaccine Institute in Cape Town made vaccines like BCG. The SAIMR used to make vaccines as well, and the National Institute of Virology used to make polio vaccines. In fact, they were building a huge polio vaccine manufacturing facility at the National Institute of Virology when we started eliminating polio. And so there was no longer a need for polio vaccines. Yeah. But what happened in the meantime was 3 things. The first was that because we were manufacturing small quantities, it was very expensive compared to what we can buy it for. Yeah. The second is that the regulatory framework for vaccines became more stringent. Yeah. So the cost started escalating because the requirements are now so strict for the manufacturing of vaccines. And when you take India, for example, at the Serum Institute, they make billions of doses and they can make it at a fraction of the price we can. And then the third is that we couldn't keep up with the technology. The technology was moving forward and was quite expensive. And so what happened is we paid that price. So those 3 things led to a situation where it became a lot simpler, a lot more practical. We just buy our vaccines. And so that's what we did. We just bought our vaccines. And it was much cheaper to do that. Now, what happened to all of that capability? Well, a lot of that was consolidated into one facility. which today is called BioVac. BioVac is based in Cape Town. It's a public-private partnership. The private sector is a majority shareholder, but the government is a major shareholder in it. Yeah. Now, when you look at BioVac, it was established to do exactly that, which is designed to make vaccines, right? And it does make vaccines. It's just very, it's a very early facility in terms of that. It's just getting, into making vaccines.
Yeah.
The problem comes about that the technology that's being used for COVID vaccines is very advanced. It's technology we don't have. It's capabilities we don't have. And to make something like, let's say, let me give an example, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that is a live adenovirus 26 vector vaccine. That's a live viral vector vaccine. We have no capability anywhere on the entire continent to do that. There are very few countries in the world that can do that. So we don't have that technology. Now that means we would have to invest and build that technology. So when you hear Aspen is making 300 million Johnson & Johnson vaccines, they're not making anything. They're just filling it in bottles and putting a label on it. The actual vaccine is being made overseas and being shipped here. They're just filling and finishing. Now, we can do that at BioVac as well. What we need to do is we need to rebuild and get in all this new technology and be able to make these vaccines. Now, to do that is a very expensive business. And I was very pleased to see that the Minister Nzimande, made an announcement that he is investing a whole lot of money into BioVac to help BioVac, because we need to build BioVac now, not because it can make vaccines for this epidemic, but for the next one.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Now about the continent of Africa, again, there is a colleague, or a friend who is at HSRC, who actually, wrote an article sometime last year complaining about the fact that African countries don't seem to invest, in science, don't seem to invest enough, or at least collaborate, to be able to put money together to develop competencies for the continent. As a result, she was, saying we will perpetually depend on the rich countries. So as a leading scientist, in the country and the continent and the world, your view around, prioritization of science and empowering scientists, to be able to do what they need to do to help the continent, to help our country to be self-reliant.
You're absolutely right. And I think, countries across Africa committed to spending 1% of their GDP on research. And no country has been able to do that. South Africa spends about 0.79%. So we're probably as close as we're going to get to that 1% target. Now, at the level at which we invest in science, we have been able to build some of the leading facilities in science, especially in the field of HIV and TB, because we have the problem here, we have the disease here. So we, of course, have many really good scientists in those fields. But I think that ultimately, when you want to really build a capability, you have to do it a bit like a Manhattan Project. Yes. You have to say, we are the best people. Yes. I'm going to lock them away. I'm going to give them, as much cash as they need. I'm going to let them go ahead and make this happen. That's because you don't get a vaccine just by saying, okay, we'll invest, a few million rands. You can't do that. You've got to put your best minds together. And I think that across Africa, we have several excellent scientists who can do this. there are only 2 facilities in the whole of Africa that currently make vaccines, one in Senegal and one here in Cape Town. Now, those are in Dakar and in Cape Town. Those are the only 2. No one else can make, an actual vaccine and put it in a bottle and give it to somebody. No one else has that capability. I believe that we should invest as a continent in those 2 facilities and build those 2 up, because they've got the starting point. They've already doing this. Now let's get them raised up. It's a big investment. I mean, you're talking about a facility that would be required to make vaccines would cost probably in the region of around R250 million. And that's just to build the facility and to hire the people to actually be able to run that kind of facility. That's a lot of money. And our country has many other needs.
Yes, and I mean, if you look at a rich country like the US, to set up that Operation Warpspeed, which was responsible for assisting, organizations like Moderna and others. I mean, the initial funding was like $10 billion US.
Yeah,
that's a lot of money.
I mean, and you can see the dividends it pays. So because of Operation Warpspeed, so what the US government did is it said, any private company, if you want to make a vaccine, we will give you money to do that. And we will give you the money to test your vaccine. So all your research costs will meet it. So if you take Moderna, the actual vaccine comes from the NIH, is manufactured by a company called Moderna. Moderna is a very small company. They don't actually have much else. Yeah. So all their research costs were actually funded by the US government. But now the price of that is that once the company now has a successful vaccine, the US government makes a determination as to where those vaccines go. Because from their point of view, we paid for this. And the same with Johnson & Johnson, right? Operation Warpspeed paid for their vaccines. Yeah. So the US government will make the determination of all the vaccines made by Johnson & Johnson, Moderna and others in the US. They'll decide what happens. Now, Pfizer didn't use Operation Warpspeed. So Pfizer has the most flexibility. They can go anywhere, they can do whatever they want. But the US, because of that investment, they will get to vaccinate their population first because they have the supply of the vaccine. So the rest of us, we join the queue and we wait.
Yes. Now, Prof, in one of the newspapers that I read, the Times Live, that this is on the 12th of Jan this year, they are quoting you having said on SAFM that you feel like you let your country down as far as the vaccine race is concerned. And this was talking about your discussions with Professor Lynn Morris from NICD. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So back in June, July, it was that I had a discussion with several people to say, do we have the capability to make vaccines, including, with many of our leading scientists. Now, among those was Professor Morris, who had just written an article in which she presented a set of arguments that, yes, we can make a vaccine. We can make a coronavirus vaccine. And that this is what it would take. And she, when I read the article, I phoned her. I said, this is terrific, that we can do this. And she was outlining what it would take and so on. And I said, I think it's a great idea. And I put the phone down and then I just forgot about it. And I didn't do what I normally do. When I think that something is a good idea, I go and I advocate for it. I would go and raise money for it. I would go and talk to people about it. I was just too busy. We were in the middle of the first wave. I just didn't have the bandwidth because I should have really taken up Professor Morris's idea. And I should have said to her, let me help you raise the money. Now, I myself, of course, have spent many years making vaccines. I have patents on HIV vaccines and so on. So, that's what I do. I sometimes think, maybe I should have just given everything up and said, okay, let me focus on making a vaccine.
Yeah.
But, of course, hindsight is a good teacher. But at the time, I think I should have been more supportive of her initiative. And so I felt I let her down. I let our country down in not being a stronger advocate for us making our own vaccine here in South Africa.
Now, Prof, let me switch now to issues around vaccination. Earlier today on my social media, I asked some of my people, to just suggest questions I should ask you. And when I look at those questions, the majority are centering around vaccination.
Yeah.
And they were coming from people from different walks of life, medical, non-medical, but majority of the questions were around vaccination. Now, at the beginning of January, as a country, I think it was the 2nd of January, the minister and the experts like you, I'm not sure if you were part of it, but there was a public briefing, around the vaccination plan for South Africa, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and all of that. Now, we are at a point where, we've just gone through a situation where we're supposed to start vaccinating healthcare workers with the AstraZeneca vaccine. And at the 11th hour, then you guys came in and told us that, no, something is not all right. Our variant, the 501Y version 2, for mild and moderate illnesses, it's not very, very good. So you had to suspend that. Now, my question then is, since that time, since that point, there has been a feeling, by South Africans that things have moved very, very slowly. So I just want you to now tell us, looking at that program that had already been developed, that was supposed to be rolled out on the 1st of February with the AZ vaccine, which has now been substituted with the J&J vaccine under a trial setting, Sisonke trial setting, obviously with limitations, was MRC has to oversee all of that, and we've only vaccinated about 147,000 healthcare workers up until yesterday. So there is a worry about the slow movement in vaccinating South Africans, and with the third wave coming. So I just want your sense of where we are around vaccination, the decision to stop the AZ vaccine, or vaccination, was it the right one, with the benefit of hindsight? But also maybe related to that, there is the issue in Europe about countries suspending the use of AZ vaccine because of the clotting matters. So I just wanted to talk about the AZ vaccine, us stopping it, and then the subsequent issues, but also come back to the J&J issue.
Yeah, I think when we look at the situation on vaccines, there are three key issues that speak out to us. The first is that in order to solve a pandemic, you cannot solve a pandemic by vaccinating in one country and leaving the rest of the world unvaccinated. That's not how you solve a pandemic. You do not solve a pandemic by taking 20 countries that are rich and vaccinating them and leaving the rest of the world behind. There's no scenario that enables you to get to normality based on that approach, because if the virus is continuing to transmit in any part of the world, then that means we have a higher risk of a variant. Yes. The variant has changed everything about our understanding of how we're going to control this disease. And so when you have that scenario, and it's been referred to in different ways, vaccine nationalism or whatever you want to call it, but essentially the way to deal with a pandemic is to distribute vaccines equitably. In other words, that all countries are rising their vaccination levels at a similar rate so that you're controlling the virus globally at a reasonable rate across the board. Because there's no way you're going to get 8 billion doses of vaccines in a few months, or it's going to take us years to do that.
Yeah.
So we need to understand that there is no immediate solution to this problem. There is no scenario where we're going to be able to vaccinate our population just like that. We're going to wait to get vaccines. Now, the supply is one issue. And the second problem, so the first issue is about supply, vaccine nationalism, the need for equity. The second problem is that we can't simply take any vaccine and just use it here. And the reason for that is we have a variant.
Yes.
These vaccines have not been tested against a variant. Where they have been tested, they've caused a lot of concern. Let me give you an example. You have a vaccine that's tested in the UK and Brazil, and it's found to be 70% effective. The same vaccine is tested in South Africa in our 501v2 variant, and is 22% effective. Now, you tell me you can't go on 70% in the UK and say, we're just going to give it here, because it's not effective here against mild and moderate disease. Yeah. Now, what we would have liked is for the study to have been done properly, where it included the elderly as well, so that we would see, does it work against severe disease? Yeah. Because these vaccines, in their first priority, are to be given to elderly people, and people with comorbidities, elderly people, healthcare workers. So you test a vaccine in young people where you don't get severe disease. Now, we don't know, does the vaccine work against severe disease? Yeah. We'd like to know that. There is no clinical evidence for that. So that means that we've got there's no evidence, clinical evidence, that it works. There are many points of view. There are many speculations. One speculates, yes, it'll work. Another one speculates, no, it won't work. Yeah. All points of view are legitimate because there's no evidence. Yeah. You can speculate whatever you want to speculate. You can draw on whatever other evidence to just make your case. So all points of view are legitimate. The WHO says, go ahead. Another group says, don't go ahead. So you got all of these differing views. For me, the fundamental question must be, are we going to use a vaccine where we know it does not work well for mild and severe, moderate disease? So if you get mild disease, moderate disease, it's not going to help you. Yeah. We don't know if it prevents severe disease. Are we still going to give that to people? Is that a wise thing to do? Is that what you trust scientists because we want to make sure we make the best decisions? When there's uncertainty, we err on the side of conservatism. We don't want to end up with a situation where we vaccinate 500,000 people and then find out, oh, it doesn't work. Yeah. Is that what we want to do? No, we don't want to do that. No, instead, we've got a J&J vaccine. J&J vaccine tested in South Africa, shown to be 57% effective against mild and moderate disease, 85% effective against severe disease. Let's use that. Yeah. Okay, it'll be a little bit slower. That's okay. But now we're going carefully with something we know works. So when I give you, as a doctor, I give you a J&J shot, I'm doing so confidently that I know the evidence that it'll protect you from severe disease. Yeah. If I gave you an AstraZeneca vaccine, I don't know if it's going to protect you. What do I tell you? Yeah.
yes.
So you see, I think we need to be careful. I don't have a problem with people who say, give it anyway.
Yeah.
I think that's what they want to do. I think that's not a problem for me because, as I said to you, there's no evidence.
Yeah.
So it might work, it might not work.
Yeah.
You can be glass half full, glass half empty, and whichever way you are. I feel that the responsible thing to do would be for us to get alternate vaccines where we are more confident that they work. And that's what we've done. So our government has bought 20 million Pfizer vaccines. Pfizer vaccines are coming next month.
Yeah.
Now, okay, it means we're losing like 2 weeks. Okay, all right. You know, we're losing 2 weeks. I understand that. We could have vaccinated people. We might have saved lives. I understand that. But I'd rather be more confident and know that I've given you a vaccine that will protect you.
Yeah. Yes. And by the way, just before we went live, Prof, SAPRA has just approved the Section 21 for the J&J vaccine.
Oh, wonderful. So now it doesn't have to be done under a clinical trial.
Yes.
Because now it's a licensed vaccine.
Yes.
Very
so
good.
I think it then clears the issue that a number of our colleagues have been, having to say, why under a trial, expanded trial? Does that mean we're being made guinea pigs? But I mean, the results had already come out already on the last Friday of January. So it was just a short-term tactic, whilst waiting for the approval, which then came out, at 4:30. This afternoon.
There's simply no question of guinea pig. There's no unproven vaccine. J&J works. We know it works. So giving it under clinical trial conditions was a really good idea because it enabled us to collect more information on the safety. We were able to see all the side effects, and we have side effects. We're dealing with them. And that's very important. So actually rolling it out initially as a clinical trial was a really good idea. But it's too slow. We got to speed it up. And now with it being licensed, that can happen.
Yeah. All right. So, Prof, now just around the vaccine issues, I'm trying to look at these.
I have to leave. I got another meeting at 6.
Okay, no, Prof.
Sorry, anyway, I thought we were just 1 hour. My apologies.
No, all right, no problem, Prof. But anyway, your last word to our viewers about vaccination.
When we look at COVID-19 and we look at the devastation it has caused, it has upset all of us. It's created anxiety in all of us. It has changed how we understand the world. It has changed how we relate to others. In all of that, we've got to try and find a pathway to a future that will enable us to get back as much of our normalcy as is possible. We are never getting back to pre-COVID world. We're going to go back, we're going to go forward. And as we go forward, we're going to need to be vaccinated. I want to encourage every one of you, please get vaccinated as soon as the opportunity arises for your category. When you qualify, be there, get your vaccine. But remember that these vaccines are not 100% effective. They are very effective, but they're not 100%. There's no vaccine that's 100% effective. So you still have to wear a mask. You still have to maintain social distancing. But it gives you much, much more confidence about your risk and the way in which you can live your life. So get vaccinated.
Right. Thank you very much, Prof, for your time. I'm sorry for going above a few minutes, but I'm sure it's not the last time I knock on your door. But thank you very much and continue doing the good work for the country. You are providing the leadership that is required, and you are giving us confidence that, things are happening. And thank you once again. And also with whoever that you're working with within that, MAC, keep doing the good work. Thank you very much.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you to all our viewers who have tuned in. Thank you for giving us your time. We hope to continue these kind of discussions because we are still in the middle of the pandemic. And for as long as it is there, we will continue to invite people to enlighten us. So thank you to everybody.